Thanks, Sam, and thanks everyone for joining us this afternoon for this webinar. I'm going to just jump right in since, as usual, we do have quite a bit of material to cover. I want to start out, when we talk about vendor management, there are some things that we definitely need to keep in mind. And the first one is that outsourcing does not reduce your risks. You still own the information. You still retain the responsibility to ensure the security, the confidentiality, the integrity, and the availability of the information. Kind of comes right out of GLBA and the requirements there. I mean, you also have to take into consideration the expertise of the providers, so the degree of risk as well as the need for those controls and for the additional monitoring that you need to be doing that we will get into is going to vary depending upon the size of the vendor and what they are actually doing for you, really, more than anything else. So the approach we're going to talk about, while it is an approach that can be applied no matter what your situation, there really isn't a one-size-fits-all when it comes to an overall vendor management program. Different providers are going to have different specialties. There's going to be different needs. But the process we talk about, as I said, is one that we are going to be able to use and apply no matter even the size of your organization or the complexity of your organization, but also then for any vendor that you particularly have. So when we start out, we want to look at the FFIEC requirement, and there is an outsourcing technology services handbook. But if you notice the date, it is June of 2004. That was when it was originally issued, and it hasn't been updated since. However, as you're going to see, again, in a few slides, that we do have some more recent guidance. There are some regulations that are out there that also tie back to the need for having that vendor management program. But this quote is specifically from that FFIEC handbook. And they're really talking about the fact that managing the relationship is more than a technology issue. I mean, it's an enterprise-wide corporate issue. That effective oversight, it's going to provide a framework, as I was saying, for overall for management to be able to identify, measure, monitor, and control the risks that are associated with outsourcing, and that the board and senior management need to implement and make sure that there is developed an enterprise-wide information security program and processes that are in place, because it is, as this particular quote is, the responsibility is theirs to make sure that it is in place and it is effective. Now, I get asked a lot, and I think from what I see when I'm out doing audit in financial institutions, I do tend to see that vendor management has become, or is thought to be, an IT responsibility. And in reality, it isn't. It's partly their responsibility, but it should not be overall an IT manager's responsibility to make sure or to even do the vendor management program. Vendor management is definitely a piece of it, but it is not really the place for it in the IT area. Main reason for that is, as you see as we go through this, it is enterprise-wide, and there are vendors throughout your organization that don't have anything to do with the IT area specifically. So we're going to talk about having different areas responsible for different things, or at least everybody is needing to coordinate the overall program and what's being done, and maybe the coordinator of the program is the IT manager or the information security officer. But to really rely on your IT department, your IT manager, to handle the entire program, really and truly just is not being fair to the department or to those individuals. And I hope you'll see why as we get further into this presentation. Now, why do we need a vendor management program? Well, there are a lot of reasons, but I'm just going to flat start out with the regulatory requirement because that seems to be where everybody goes. That's your thought process is, well, I have to do this because the regulators have said that I have to do this. There are good reasons for doing it despite the fact that it is a regulatory requirement. But we'll start there. GLBA stated that you need to have an outsourced, third-party outsource program in place, that you need to be overseeing those relationships. The ID theft red flag program also says that you need to be overseeing those relationships. Then there's additional regulatory guidance that I had mentioned. We have the 2004 handbook, but then we have all this other guidance that's been issued. We have the 2011 authentication in an internet banking environment supplement that also addresses vendor management. The 2009 risk management of remote deposit capture that mentions vendor management. We have the FDIC financial institution letter from 2008, guidance for managing third-party risk. And then the OCC in 2008 issued a guidance as well that talks about third-party risk, but they also have one that's very focused on application security and overseeing that vendor relationship and doing the due diligence from that specific application standpoint. Now, there are some key factors that come into play when we talk about this process, this whole vendor management program. Now, I had mentioned a couple of slides ago about the fact that there needs to be a way of identifying, measuring, monitoring, and managing the risk. The risk is present whether you outsource it or whether you provide the services in-house. I mean, we still have the risk there. You retain that risk. Oversight from the board and from senior management. They are ultimately responsible. There needs to be an awareness of those risks. That may bring along with it for the board and senior management some specific training on the types of risk. They need to know about the risk assessment and why we have a risk assessment and what the risks are associated with outsourcing. When we talk about prudence, we need to make sure from a risk perspective that there is alignment between the business, the needs assessment. Have we looked at what we currently offer, and is it in a line, and are these truly programs, are these truly relationships that we need? And especially prior to establishing a new relationship, you want to have a needs assessment program put in place ahead of time, and we're going to talk about that in just a few more slides. That way, when somebody comes up and says, hey, we need this new product, we need this new service, I've found this vendor, they have this great service, they have this great software, well, you want to make sure that you understand what it is the bank is needing, what is it that this vendor is providing, and do we already have something in place that's going to do the exact same thing and we just haven't been utilizing it? So you want to assess those needs beforehand as well as on an ongoing basis. You also want to make sure you've implemented effective controls that are going to address the risks that have been identified. You've got to have ongoing monitoring to identify and evaluate risk and ensure that security is in place, especially at that service provider location. And then you want to make sure that there's procedures, roles, responsibilities, and reporting requirements in place, and that we have a process for all of that. So those are the key factors when we look at this overall vendor management program.